The crimson sunset painted the Colorado Territory sky as Katherine Sutherland stood on her cabin porch, rifle cradled in her arms, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. She'd heard horses approaching, never a casual occurrence this far from town in 1876. Her finger hovered near the trigger, ready for trouble that seemed to follow every stranger in these parts. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, silhouettes against the dying light. Katherine tensed, but then recognized the lead rider's distinctive hat and relaxed slightly. It was Marshal Parker from town, flanked by 2 deputies, but something was wrong. The middle rider slumped precariously in his saddle, barely holding on. "Miss Sutherland," the marshal called out, urgency in his voice. "We need help." Katherine set her rifle down and hurried across the yard as they approached. The injured man's head lolled forward, his shirt dark with blood that glistened black in the fading light. "What happened?" she demanded, reaching for the reins of the wounded man's horse. "Ambush," Marshal Parker explained tersely. "This here's Nathan Forrester. He's been tracking the Delaney gang for weeks. Finally caught up to them near Devil's Gulch. They shot him twice before escaping. Your place was closest." Katherine helped them ease the unconscious cowboy from his horse. He was a tall man with a strong jaw now slack with pain, dark hair matted with sweat and dust. Blood seeped from wounds in his side and shoulder. "Get him inside," she ordered, her mind already cataloging what she would need. "Deputy, fetch my medicine box from under the bed." "Marshal, help me get his coat off." They carried Nathan Forrester into her small cabin and laid him on her bed. Katherine worked quickly, cutting away his blood-soaked shirt to reveal the wounds. 1 bullet had grazed his side, carving a deep furrow through flesh. The other was lodged in his shoulder, the skin around it angry and swollen. "Will he live?" Marshal Parker asked, his weathered face etched with concern. Katherine pressed clean cloth against the bleeding wounds. "I don't know. The shoulder wound needs the bullet removed, and he's lost a lot of blood." "We've got to get back to town," the marshal said reluctantly. "Johnson and his boys were spotted near the bank, and we can't leave it unguarded. Can you manage?" Katherine had tended plenty of injuries in her 26 years on the frontier. After losing her parents to illness 3 years prior, she'd been running the small ranch alone, developing a reputation for self-sufficiency and skilled nursing that had townsfolk bringing their sick and injured to her doorstep. "I'll do what I can," she said firmly, "but I make no promises." After the lawman departed, Katherine set to work properly. She heated water, prepared her instruments, and mixed a strong tincture of willow bark. When everything was ready, she took a deep breath and began the delicate process of removing the bullet. Nathan remained mercifully unconscious as she probed the wound. Her hands were steady, her movements precise. When the bullet finally came free, she dropped it into a tin cup with a soft clink. She cleaned both wounds thoroughly with whiskey and stitched them closed with neat, even sutures before applying a poultice of herbs to draw out any infection. As she worked, she studied his face. He was handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. His hands were calloused, marking him as a man accustomed to hard work, despite the marshal calling him a tracker. After bandaging his wounds, Katherine pulled a chair beside the bed and settled in for what promised to be a long night. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in the cabin walls. She stoked the fire and prepared more willow bark tea for when if he woke. Hours passed. Katherine changed his bandages twice more as blood continued to seep through. His skin burned with fever, and he muttered incoherently, occasional words emerging from the feverish haze. "Delaney," promise, and once, heart-wrenchingly, "Sarah." Near midnight, Katherine was jolted from her half-sleep by a crash. Nathan had suddenly sat up, eyes wild and unseeing, and knocked over the bedside table. She rushed to his side, pressing him gently but firmly back onto the bed. "Easy," she soothed. "You're safe. You've been shot, but you're safe now." His eyes, a startling blue in his flushed face, struggled to focus on her. "Who?" he rasped. "Katherine Sutherland. You're at my ranch. The marshal brought you here." He tried to rise again but fell back with a groan. "The Delaneys, they got away, but you need to rest now. The marshal will handle them." Nathan's face contorted in frustration before his strength gave out. He sank back into the pillow, eyes closing. "Must stop them," he murmured before unconsciousness claimed him again. Katherine dipped a cloth into cool water and placed it on his forehead. She hadn't expected such intensity from an injured man. Whoever these Delaneys were, they clearly meant a great deal to him, not in a good way. Through the night, Katherine maintained her vigil. Each time his bandages soaked through, she carefully replaced them, applying fresh poultices to draw out infection. She coaxed water between his lips when he stirred, supporting his head with gentle hands. Dawn was breaking when Nathan's fever finally broke. Katherine, exhausted from her night-long watch, had just changed his bandages again when his eyes fluttered open, clear and coherent this time. "Good morning," she said softly. He stared at her, confusion evident in his expression. "You're real," he said hoarsely. "I thought I dreamed you." Katherine smiled tiredly. "Very real. How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo." He tried to shift position and winced. "How bad?" "2 bullets. One grazed your side, the other was in your shoulder. I got it out, but you lost a lot of blood." "You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Forrester." "Nathan," he corrected. "And I have you to thank for that." His gaze took in her exhausted face, the blood-stained apron she still wore. "You've been up all night." Katherine shrugged, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. "It wouldn't be the first time." "You're a doctor?" he asked, trying to make sense of his situation. "No, just a woman who's learned what needs learning out here." She stood and moved to the stove. "You should try to eat something. I've got broth simmering." As she ladled the simple broth into a bowl, Nathan watched her movements. She was neither young nor old, he thought, but somewhere in between, with strength in her slender frame and competence in her movements. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical braid, with wisps escaping to frame a face more handsome than pretty, marked by intelligence and determination. "The marshal called you a tracker," Katherine said as she returned with the broth. "You're hunting the Delaney gang." Nathan's face hardened. "Not just hunting them, I mean to bring them to justice." Katherine helped him sit up enough to sip the broth. "That sounds personal." "It is." For a moment, he seemed disinclined to elaborate, but then something in her steady gaze prompted him to continue. "They killed my brother last year, robbed the bank where he worked in Denver, shot him when he tried to protect a woman they were threatening." "I'm sorry," Katherine said simply. "He had a wife, a baby on the way." Nathan's hands tightened around the bowl. "I promised his widow I'd make it right." "Is that why you became a tracker?" He shook his head slightly. "I was already working as one. Used to scout for the army during the war, then started tracking outlaws for bounties. But this is the only bounty that matters." Katherine took the empty bowl from him. "You need to heal before you can hunt anyone. That means rest." As if to punctuate her words, Nathan's eyelids grew heavy again. "Seems I don't have much choice," he murmured as sleep reclaimed him. Katherine watched him for a moment, noting how vulnerability softened his features in sleep. Then she went outside to tend to her neglected chores, bone-weary but unable to rest until her animals were cared for. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Nathan slept most of the time at first, his body working hard to replenish the blood he'd lost. Katherine tended his wounds, cooked simple meals, and maintained her small ranch. When he was awake, they talked tentatively at first, then with increasing ease. Katherine told him about growing up in this valley, the daughter of pioneers who had built this cabin with their own hands. She spoke of the harsh winter that had taken both her parents 3 years ago, and her determination to keep the ranch going despite pressure to sell to the expanding cattle operation to the north. Nathan, in turn, shared stories of his life on the move tracking Comanche raiders in Texas, hunting down stagecoach robbers in Arizona territory, the brief stint of peace when he tried settling down in Denver near his brother's family. "Don't you ever get tired of moving?" Katherine asked on the fourth day as she changed his bandages. His wounds were healing well, the risk of infection receding. Nathan considered the question. "I used to think I was born to wander. Now I'm not so sure." "What changed?" "My brother died," he said simply. "Made me realize I don't have much to show for all my years of wandering. Nothing permanent anyway." Katherine's fingers paused briefly in their work. "What would permanence look like for you?" Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Nathan didn't answer immediately, and Katherine quickly finished bandaging his shoulder, suddenly conscious of the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers. "I should check on the chickens," she said, rising quickly. That evening, as they sat by the fire sharing a simple supper of rabbit stew, Nathan broached a subject that had clearly been on his mind. "You're out here alone," he observed. "No husband, no family nearby." Katherine stirred her stew. "My parents were it. There was a man once a surveyor for the railroad. We were to be married, but he got a better offer back east." Her tone was matter of fact, but Nathan detected the old hurt beneath it. "His loss," Nathan said quietly. Katherine looked up, caught by the sincerity in his voice. "It was a long time ago, and since then," she smiled wryly. "Not many eligible bachelors beating a path to my door. Besides, I've been busy keeping this place running." "You've done a fine job of it," Nathan said, looking around the neat, well-maintained cabin. "Most men couldn't have managed what you have." "Most men don't have to prove themselves constantly," Katherine replied with unexpected heat. "Every time I trade in town, every time I negotiate the price of my wool or deal with the cattle barons trying to push me off my land, I have to be twice as capable, twice as tough." Nathan nodded, understanding. "The frontier's no easy place for a woman alone." "No place is easy for a woman alone," Katherine corrected. "But at least out here, I'm free to succeed or fail on my own terms." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Katherine reached for her rifle, but Nathan was already on his feet, moving to the window with surprising agility for a man still healing from gunshot wounds. "It's the marshal," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Marshal Parker brought news and supplies." The Delaney gang had robbed another bank 60 miles south and killed a teller. The hunt was intensifying. "We could use your tracking skills, Forrester, if you're up to it," the marshal said, eyeing Nathan's improved condition. Nathan glanced at Katherine before answering. "Another week, maybe." "I'd be no good to you right now." After the marshal left, a tension hung in the air. Katherine busied herself putting away the supplies he'd brought, avoiding Nathan's gaze. "You'll be leaving soon," she said finally, her back to him as she arranged canned goods on a shelf. "I have to," he replied. "I made a promise." Katherine turned to face him, her expression carefully neutral. "Of course, I understand." That night neither slept well. Nathan had insisted on moving to a pallet near the fire, leaving Katherine her bed back, but she found herself staring at the ceiling, acutely aware of his presence just across the room. For his part, Nathan lay awake, listening to the wind and thinking about promises, both those made and those unspoken. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Katherine was in the yard feeding her chickens when 3 riders approached rough-looking men whose appearance immediately put her on alert. She backed toward the cabin, hand reaching for the pistol she kept in her apron pocket. "Morning, madam," the leader called, a tall man with a scar bisecting one eyebrow. "Wondering if you might have seen a friend of ours. Marshall brought him this way about a week back. Tall fellow, dark hair." Katherine's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "I haven't seen anyone matching that description." The man's eyes narrowed, scanning the yard, noting the 3 horses in her corral when a woman alone would likely keep only 1 or 2. "Mind if we look around?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question as he dismounted. Katherine drew her pistol. "I do mind. This is my property." The man laughed, a sound without humor. "Now, that's not very hospitable." "Neither is this," came Nathan's voice from the cabin door, where he stood with Katherine's rifle trained on the men. "Back away from her, Delaney." The scarred man's face contorted with rage. "Forrester, should have known you'd be too stubborn to die. Like you were too cowardly to finish the job yourself." Nathan's voice was calm, but Katherine could see the effort it cost him to hold the rifle steady. "3 against 2 and one of you barely standing," Delaney sneered. "Not good odds, Forrester." "3 against 3, came another voice as Marshal Parker and a deputy emerged from the tree line, guns drawn. They must have circled back after leaving the previous day, perhaps suspecting the Delaneys might track Nathan here. What followed was a brief, intense gunfight. Katherine dove for cover behind the water trough as bullets splintered wood around her. She fired her pistol twice, forcing one of Delaney's men to retreat behind their horses. Nathan, despite his injuries, maintained a steady rate of fire from the cabin door. The fight ended abruptly when the marshal's bullet caught Delaney in the chest. His companions, seeing their leader fall, quickly surrendered. In the sudden silence that followed, Katherine ran to Nathan, who had slumped against the doorframe, his face pale with exertion. Fresh blood stained his bandages. "You fool," she said, her voice shaking as she helped him inside. "You've torn your stitches." "Had to protect you," he murmured, grimacing as she eased him onto a chair. The marshal and his deputy secured the prisoners while Katherine tended to Nathan's reopened wound. As she worked, her hands trembled slightly. "You could have been killed," she said quietly. Nathan caught her wrist, stilling her movements. "So could you. Delaney doesn't leave witnesses." Their eyes met, and the fear they'd both felt not for themselves but for each other hung in the air between them. "Thank you," Katherine said finally, "for protecting my home." "Our home," Nathan replied without thinking, then looked startled at his own words. A flush spread across Katherine's cheeks, but before she could respond, the marshal entered to report that the prisoners were secured. "We'll take them back to town to stand trial," he said. "Forrester, you'll need to testify when you're well enough to travel," Nathan nodded. "I'll be there." After the lawmen departed with their prisoners, Katherine and Nathan were left alone with the words that hung between them. "Did you mean that?" Katherine asked finally. "About this being our home," Nathan took a deep breath. "I meant that it felt like home, more than anywhere has in a long time." He looked up at her, vulnerability plain on his face. "I know it's sudden. We've only known each other a week, but sometimes a week can tell you more than years." Katherine moved to the window, looking out at her land, the garden she'd planted, the sheep grazing in the distance, the mountains beyond. "I never planned to share this place," she said softly. "It was my refuge." "I understand," Nathan said, disappointment evident in his voice. "I shouldn't have presumed. But," Katherine continued, turning to face him, "I never planned to feel this way about anyone either." The weeks that followed were a time of healing and discovery. Nathan recovered his strength, gradually taking on more chores around the ranch. Katherine found herself watching him split wood or repair fences, admiring not just his physical capability but the care he took with her home, their home, as it was increasingly becoming. They still had their differences. Nathan's restless nature sometimes chafed against Katherine's rootedness. Her independence occasionally bristled at his protective instincts. But in the evenings, as they sat by the fire talking long into the night, they discovered the rare gift of being truly seen and understood by another person. When Nathan was strong enough, they rode into town together to give testimony at the Delaney gang's trial. Justice was swift on the frontier. The surviving gang members were sentenced to hang for multiple murders and robberies. Afterward, Nathan sent a letter to his brother's widow, telling her that her husband's killers had been brought to justice. "What will you do now?" Katherine asked as they rode home beneath a sky ablaze with stars. "Your promise is fulfilled." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking about that. There's always another outlaw to track, another bounty to collect." Katherine's heart sank, though she tried not to let it show. "Of course, you're good at what you do." "But I'm tired of chasing," Nathan continued. "Tired of always moving on. I've been thinking I might try staying in one place, growing something instead of hunting it down." Hope blossomed in Katherine's chest. "Any particular place in mind?" Nathan reined his horse to a stop, turning to look at her in the moonlight. "Only if I'm welcome." Katherine smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "More than welcome, Nathan Forrester. Necessary." When they reached the cabin, Nathan didn't immediately dismount. Instead, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small wooden box. "I got this in town today," he said, suddenly looking nervous. "It's not fancy, but it's honest, like us." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band. "Katherine Sutherland, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I can't promise it will always be easy, but I can promise I'll never stop trying to be worthy of you." Katherine placed her hand over his, closing the box. "Come inside first," she said softly. Nathan's face fell, assuming rejection, but he followed her into the cabin. Once inside, Katherine went to a small trunk in the corner and removed something wrapped in cloth. "These were my mother's," she said, unwrapping two simple gold bands. "My father made them for their wedding from a gold nugget he found in the stream." She held them out to Nathan. "I always hoped to use them someday." Understanding dawned on Nathan's face. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," Katherine confirmed, "but on one condition. Name it. We build something here together, not just a ranch, but a home, a family, something permanent." Nathan took her hands in his, the rings pressed between their palms. "I can think of nothing I want more." They were married the following month in the small church in town, with Marshall Parker standing as Nathan's best man and the storekeeper's wife attending Katherine. Their wedding night was a revelation of tenderness and passion that left them both wondering how they had lived so long without each other. As spring turned to summer and summer to fall, they worked side by side to expand the ranch. Nathan's skills as a tracker translated surprisingly well to ranching, his knowledge of the land and its patterns proving invaluable as they increased their flock and added cattle. Katherine, for her part, found that sharing decisions and burdens made them lighter, not heavier as she had feared. They had their disagreements, of course. Nathan's protective instincts sometimes clashed with Katherine's fierce independence. Her practicality occasionally frustrated his more ambitious plans. But each night, as they lay together in the bed where she had once tended his wounds, they found their way back to the truth at the center of their union, that they were stronger together than apart. Word spread through the territory of the formidable Forresters of Sutherland Ranch. The cattle barons who had once pressured Katherine to sell found themselves facing a united front they could not intimidate. Travelers spoke of the hospitality of the ranch, where Katherine's healing skills and Nathan's fairness earned them respect from settlers and native tribes alike. 1 year to the day after Nathan had arrived bleeding on Katherine's doorstep, they stood together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Katherine leaned against her husband, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. "Any regrets?" Nathan asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Katherine smiled, placing his hand over her stomach where their child was just beginning to make its presence known. "Not a single one." Nathan's eyes widened as he realized what she was telling him. Truly, she confirmed. "It seems we've created something permanent after all." As darkness fell, they remained on the porch, talking of the future they would build together, not just for themselves, but for the child who would inherit the legacy of their love. And as the first stars appeared in the sky, Katherine thought of that night a year ago when she had sat changing the bandages of a wounded stranger, never imagining that in saving his life, she was also saving her own. Their story, which had begun in blood and pain, had transformed into something beautiful and enduring proof that even in the harsh realities of the frontier, love could not only survive but flourish, as wild and true as the land itself.